Have you ever sat in that heavy silence at a family dinner? Here on Women's Life Stories, we retell those moments, honest every day, sometimes controversial. Every story is a mirror. Subscribe, join the conversation, and maybe find a little healing. The leash still held a pinch of beach sand, where I'd hung it beside the door grit that should have jumped when Rookie charged the room the way he always did. The cottage smelled like cedar and sea salt and the lemon oil I'd swiped across the counters before driving to Portland to sign retirement paperwork. Everything sat where I'd left it. Everything sounded wrong. Rookie. My voice folded into the quiet. No claws ticking on hardwood. No sigh from the canvas bed by the heater. I set my tote down and touched the hook. Short blonde hairs clung to the leather like evidence. Kyle, Maya. The names felt like test results before you open the envelope. The refrigerator hummed with perfect composure. Somewhere out in the bay, a buoy bell chimed once, then waited. They were at the kitchen table like kids caught cheating at Go Fish. Kyle hunched over his phone, worrying a cracked case he'd sworn to replace months ago. Maya twisted a ring until the skin beneath it blushed. "Where's my dog?" I said. Not a question, an inventory check. Mama Maya's started voice sugared the way it gets when she's about to steer around a wreck. "How was the... Where is Rookie?" Kyle's jaw ticked, the same old 7th grade tell. "It's temporary," he said. There was this chance." "Say it." "We sold him," Maya said, because she's always been brave with nouns. 7,500. I sat because my knees didn't trust me. The lemon rose off the wood like another witness. "Who?" "A guy named Daniel Cross," Kyle said. "Lives past the Cannery Road. Runs a K-9 program. He wanted a purebred for search and rescue and Rookie. Rookie is a shelter mix who looks good in photographs," I said. "He learns fast and hates fireworks. He is not a purebred anything." Kyle's mouth made that bold shape that comes right before trouble. The breeder page said his markings were consistent with... "The Facebook breeder page," I said. Maya's mascara surrendered. "He paid cash. He said he needed a Malinois right away and Rookie looks like Rookie," I said. The bell out in the bay answered ding, long pause, ding. The sound that tells you weather's turning. "Phone," I said. Kyle slid his over without arguing. The number glowed in recent calls. I tapped it. 2 rings. Cross, a low voice, said, wind moving on his end like he was standing outside. "Mr. Cross, my name is Ellen Hart. I believe you bought a dog from my children, my adult children, but the dog is mine." A beat. "Miss Hart," he said carefully, "I was about to call you. We have a problem." "What you have is my dog. And a folder full of screenshots," he said. "The page your son sent uses stolen photos, a bad microchip format, and a registration number that belongs to a pet store in Tucson. Your dog is a handsome mixed breed. Someone decided he'd appraise higher with a different label." The kitchen clock clicked once like a tongue. I counted to 3 so I wouldn't say the old useless sentence mothers learn too early. "I did not authorize a sale," I said. "Rookie belongs with me." "I understand," he said. The wind steadied as if he'd stepped into a lee. "I don't place a dog unless he clears screening. Rookie didn't. He's affectionate, smart, distractible in a way that's great for a family and terrible for a rubble pile. He shouldn't be here. I'll come get him." "That won't fix the rest," he said. "Your kids represented him as purpose-bred for search and rescue. That's misrepresentation when it's tied to a working dog program. It doesn't have to be federal to be serious." The chair rail under my palm felt like a rail on a rolling ship. "What are you asking for?" "Restitution," he said, "and a conversation where they hear the consequences from someone who isn't their mother. I run a nonprofit. We keep records. I'd prefer not to escalate. Deputy Reeves can accompany me so the talk lands the way it needs to." I looked at my children. Kyle's eyes had gone shiny with the kind of panic pride won't name. Maya had folded in on herself, all those soft corners she uses to decorate other people's lives, offering no shelter now. When I asked, 8, he said. "I'll bring the dog. We'll keep it civil." He gave me a number. I wrote it on the back of a grocery list and told him I'd see him at 8. When I ended the call, no one spoke. Fog pressed at the windows like unasked questions. Maya reached for my hand. I kept mine on the table. "He sleeps at my feet," I said, because that part mattered. "He won't understand why strangers touched his leash. We were going to buy him back," Kyle said weakly. "As soon as the money..." "Stop!" I didn't raise my voice. The quiet did the work. "You will both be here at 8. You will listen. You will not argue." Kyle pushed his chair back. "I need air." "What you need," I said, "is a broom." I glanced at the mat by the door. There's sand from his last walk. You will not pretend he vanished without trace. I took the leash from the hook, thumbed the worn place where Rookie chewed it as a pup. My hand remembered the weight of his pull, the way he'd check back with me on the trail, as if to ask whether I wanted to see what he'd found. The house held its breath and waited. Out in the bay, the bell tolled once as breath. At 7:58 a.m., the knock landed like a measured heartbeat, 3 even taps, not the frantic hammering I'd braced for. I opened the door to a gray morning and a small formation on my porch, a tall man in a work jacket with a stitched patch that read Seabrook Sayar K9, a deputy in a windbreaker with the county star, and a woman holding a clipboard in both hands like it was ballast. "Ms. Hart," the man said. "Daniel Cross." His voice matched the phone low, steady. Beside him, the deputy tipped his chin. "Reeves." The woman offered a quick, practical smile. "Tasha Price. I handle case notes for the nonprofit." And then there was Rookie, bright-eyed and vibrating nails clicking once against the porch plank as if asking permission to forget the world and be mine again. "Come in," I said, "because air is only air until it moves through a house that needs it." Rookie waited for Daniel's release cue, good boy loyal to whichever hand held the line, and then launched 28 pounds of relief straight into my ribs. I went down to a knee and took his whole head in my hands. He smelled like clean straw and someone else's laundry soap. His tail thumped so hard it rattled the umbrella stand. "Leash stays on for now," Daniel said, not unkindly. "We'll get through the talk first." Kyle and Maya were already at the kitchen table, caffeine forgotten in the mugs I set out as an excuse to keep my hands working. The living room felt too soft for this, too full of pillows that forgave everything. So I led everyone to the dining room where the old oak could carry weight. Ms. Alvarez from next door appeared at the back door with a tentative knock of her own drawn by uniforms the way gulls find bait. I waved her in. She took a chair against the wall and folded her hands over her tote, as if attending a school board meeting. Deputy Reeves set a small recorder in the center of the table and named the date and time. "Informational voluntary, no custody," he said for the audio, glancing at me for confirmation. I nodded. Tasha placed a slim manila folder in front of Kyle and a copy in front of Maya, then one by my elbow. "This is a summary," she said. "What was represented, what we verified, and options to resolve without referral." Daniel stayed standing. He didn't loom. He kept one hand on Rookie's leash, the other flat on the chair back like he trusted wood. "What you told me," he said to my children, "was that this dog was a purpose-bred Belgian Malinois with stable temperament, known lineage, and prior task exposure. You provided a microchip number that belongs to a retail dog in Tucson and photos scraped from a breeder in Idaho who flagged us last year for exactly this. When we screened Rookie, we found what Ms. Hart probably already knew. He's a great dog. He is also not what we use on collapsed structures or long-line wilderness searches." Kyle tried for a grin that had salvaged lesser mistakes. It failed halfway up his face. "Everyone pads listings," he muttered. "It's basically Craigslist." "Programs aren't Craigslist," Reeves said, not raising his voice. "They run on time, you just cost them." Maya's fingers worried the corner of the paper until it softened. "We didn't think it would matter. He looks the part." "Looking the part and being the part are different bills to pay," Tasha said. "And every hour we spend screening a dog who can't do the work is an hour we're not prepping the next team for a call-out." Rookie exhaled so loudly it almost counted as commentary and settled on my foot. I felt the familiar warmth and put one hand on his shoulder without asking permission from anyone at the table. Daniel shifted not to pace but to face both of my children evenly. "Here's how we keep this small. You return the funds I paid you in full. You complete service hours at the county shelter intake laundry, the not glamorous jobs dogs depend on. You sit through a 2-hour ethics block our volunteers complete before they're allowed on scene. Ms. Price will log it. If you meet those terms in the time frame, the file closes with an internal note. If you don't, we forward to the DA with the supporting documentation, and I stop using the word misunderstanding." There was no thunderclap, just the tick of the clock and the bay bell finding its rhythm through the fog. Kyle blew air through his teeth. "I can't dump that kind of money today." "You dumped it yesterday," Reeves said matter of fact. "I put cash in your hand," Daniel said to Maya, "and there was no heat in it, which makes this a simpler path than most. I'm not looking to make an example of you. I'm looking to not have to explain to my board why our training calendar slipped 2 weeks. Maya lifted her face. "If we pay, we get to walk away." "You pay, you work, you learn," Tasha said. "Then yes, you walk." Kyle pushed back from the table, the chair feet complaining. "What if we don't sign?" Reeves tapped the recorder once with a knuckle. "Then this copy goes to my office. It stops being my polite morning." "Sit down," I said, and there was nothing maternal in it. Kyle sat. Tasha slid pens across the table. "We can do an initial with signatures today. We'll fill in dates once you confirm availability with the shelter." Maya took her pen. Her hand shook on the first stroke of her name and steadied on the second. Kyle stared at his for a long breath, then signed with a pressure that nearly tore the paper. "Thank you," Tasha said, gathering the pages like a dealer finishing a hand. "We'll email PDFs by noon." Rookie lifted his head as if he knew the weather inside the room had shifted. I scratched the spot behind his ear that he always pretended not to love. "Is he coming home with me?" I asked, not trusting the past tense on that sentence until someone else said it. Daniel angled his head toward me. "He belongs where he understands the language," he said simply, and unclipped the lead, leaving the leash looped but loose. "I'm returning him to you now." The relief I felt didn't perform itself. It sank in quietly like tide under a pier. Reeves shut off the recorder. The click was a door closing. "Before we adjourn," I said, and my children both flinched like the word belonged to courtrooms. "I have house matters." I didn't look at Ms. Alvarez, but I was aware of her curiosity vibrating like a tuning fork. 30 days, I told Kyle and Maya. "You'll both have your own roofs by then. No new credit tied to my address. No packages arriving with my name on the invoice and yours in the return line. If you need a ride for a job interview or to move a box, ask. If you need cash, you will be disappointed." Maya nodded a quick jerk that meant the words hurt and landed anyway. Kyle opened his mouth, then closed it like the thought evaporated before it reached air. Daniel didn't smile. It would have been the wrong shape of encouragement. He slid a business card across the table. "We run public drills some Saturdays," he said, as if that was as normal as church. "If you ever want to see what the work looks like when it's done right." I placed the card beside the leash. "Thank you," I said. I meant for the card, but the words made room and held more. Reeves stood. "Ms. Hart, if you need to file a trespass order for any reason, as this shakes out my desk knows your street." It wasn't a threat. It was a neighbor offering a ladder when your roof leaks. Ms. Alvarez cleared her throat gently. "I can take a shelter shift Tuesday," she said into the room as if she were adding her name to a potluck list. "Happy to show whoever shows up where the bleach is." "We'll be there," Maya said, surprising all of us, herself included. The deputy and Tasha took their leave, politeness rising and falling in the hallway like a tide that had been through this house often enough to know the furniture. Daniel stayed a moment longer. Rookie had settled with his chin on my shoe, already sure of geography again. "I'm sorry for how he got to me," Daniel said. "I should have read the signs sooner." "You read them exactly when you needed to," I said. "You brought him back." Kyle hovered in the doorway, trying to decide whether to become visible or vapor. He stepped in. "Mr. Cross," he said, and the mister was working his mouth. "I'll figure the money." "Figure it without shortcuts," Daniel said. "They always invoice later." Kyle blinked like the sentence had more words he'd have to unpack alone. He nodded. He backed away. Rookie was gentle with the kennels, Daniel added, almost conversational. He checked every door like he was counting heads. Not a lot of dogs do that. I looked down. Rookie thumped his tail exactly twice and went still. "He likes having a job," I said. "Most of us do better with one," Daniel said. Then tipped 2 fingers in a quiet goodbye and stepped onto the porch. The fog had lifted enough that the bay bell sounded like itself again, metal and patience. I watched them go, the 3 of them in single file down my short walk, a geometry that looked like work done clean. When the door closed, the house exhaled. Rookie trotted to the hook and looked at the leash as if we'd just discovered language together. I hung it where it belonged and left my palm on the leather until the warmth from my skin moved into it. In the dining room, the manila folder sat square to the grain of the table. Kyle and Maya stared at it like it might instruct them in a language they hadn't bothered to learn. Ms. Alvarez patted my shoulder with the brisk tenderness of a woman who has installed her own storm windows. "I'll be next door," she said. "If you need a cup of sugar or a better story for the church ladies, I've got both." She let herself out. I gathered the mugs we hadn't drunk from and took them to the sink. The faucet hissed. Outside, a gull cried like laughter it couldn't help. Rookie followed me from room to room, checking my orbit the way he does when he's not sure which way the day intends to lean. I stood with my hands braced on the counter and felt the house take his weight and mine, and all 3 of us decided to hold. By late afternoon, the fog had thinned to a gauze that the sun could not quite burn through light, turning the bay the color of pewter. Rookie shadowed me from room to room with that wary joy dogs have after a separation, checking thresholds like a porter counting luggage. Maya slipped out to the boutique with a soft apology that didn't ask to be answered. Kyle retreated behind his door, the latch clicking like a coin dropped into a machine that might or might not pay out. Daniel's text arrived at 5:12. "If you're up for dinner, Blue Heron has a table on the deck. I can be there at 6. I stood at the sink reading it twice, the metal taste of the morning finally washing out of the day. 6 works, I sent back. Rookie is sleeping like someone punched his time card. Blue Heron sat on pilings over the water, the kind of place that did chowder right and trusted the view to decorate. A line of aluminum skiffs knocked softly against one another below the deck cleats, ringing the way cutlery does in a busy kitchen. The hostess led me to a corner table where the wind couldn't muscle its way in. Daniel arrived a breath after I did, jacket open, hair still damp, as if he'd solved the day with a shower, and stepped into the evening clean. He took me in the way handlers take a quick measure of a dog, attentive without being obvious. "You look like the fog finally blinked," he said. I bribed it with a sweater, I said. "Thank you for coming this morning, and for bringing him." Returning him, he corrected, settling across from me. "There's a difference. The waitress came like tide inevitable efficient and left us with 2 waters sweating into their coasters, a basket of bread that didn't need butter but had it anyway. We ordered without negotiation. I said halibut. He said chowder and blackened rockfish, and the waitress had the pen confidence of a woman who knows what her kitchen does best. For a while, we let the place talk for us gulls, heckling the harbor forks, chiming a child behind us, narrating a French fry with reverence. Daniel rested his forearms on the table, hands open, and I realized I had not been in the company of a man whose silences were comfortable in longer than I wanted to name. "How long did you do federal work?" I asked. 22 years, he said. DHS K9, the last 10. Airport's debris field, sometimes just walking a dog through a school gym so a community could see the shape of a solution. And then nonprofit, I said. And then the thing that kept me up at night became the thing I could fix before dinner. He said, a half smile that took no victory from it. I like knowing the names of the people my work touches. Makes the paperwork less theoretical. The rockfish arrived as if it had been waiting specifically for his plate. My halibut carried lemon the way a porch carries sunlight. We ate like adults who'd skipped lunch for reasons they would not dignify by naming. Rookie counted doors, he said after a few bites, as if resuming a thought midstream. At the kennels. It's not training. It's a kind of conscience. He checks my rooms, I said. If I leave a closet cracked, he noses it and looks at me like I failed inventory. Not a search dog, he said, but he reads a space. Reads people too, I said, and realized the second sentence had the weight of a compliment. He didn't duck it. He stayed pressed to your foot the whole time, he said. That's fluency. There are dogs who can learn 100 commands and never learn that. Outside, a work light winked on above the marina fuel dock, making the water around it look like hammered tin. Daniel's shoulders eased an incremental shift I recognized from night shift handoffs, the relief that comes when you realize the person across from you can carry weight. Why rescue work, I asked, out of all the things you could have done? He reached for his water and considered the glass. 2 reasons, he said finally. 1, I'm good at teaching a body how to decide in motion. 2, when things fall apart, there's a right now that doesn't care about your resume. If you can do the job, you do it. If you can't, you step back. It's honest. Ears like that, I said. All the speeches get shorter. He glanced up, registering the way I said it. You miss it yet? He asked. I thought of the charting gods and the supply closet that never admitted it was empty. I thought of the way a patient's breath steadies under your palm. Parts of it, I said. Not the noise, the clarity. We let the view stand in for conversation long enough to prove we didn't need to fill every second. When the waitress asked about dessert, he ordered a slice of berry pie as if it might be illegal not to, and 2 forks that arrived crossed like small swords. After we walked the length of the marina, the halyards clinked lazily. A dog barked at a gull as if it were personal. Daniel kept his hands in his jacket pockets the way men do when they've learned that some gestures have to be earned. He told me about a dog named Atlas who'd once found a boy under a collapsed deck, then spent the next week sleeping like he'd written a book about it. I told him about a winter where the ER waiting room became a small city, and how the only way through had been to clean a blood pressure cuff between uses as if it were a prayer. At the end of the pier, the wind gathered itself and tried for our throats. He shrugged out of his jacket and set it on my shoulders before I could pretend I wasn't cold. The fabric held the clean, faintly woody smell I'd caught that morning when he'd stepped into my house and changed the day. Thank you, I said, meaning the jacket and the evening and a handful of other nouns that did not need witnesses. He stood close enough that I could have counted the pale hairs at his temple if counting hadn't been such a foolish use of proximity. His mouth found mine without drama, a first kiss built on the steady kind of interest that knows how to read terrain. It didn't overstay. It didn't apologize. It made room for breath. By the time I got home, the sky had traded its pewter for slate, and the house looked like it was practicing being quiet. Rookie met me at the door, stretching with the full theatrical groan of a creature who forgives you for leaving because you came back. Maya's room was dark. The line of light under Kyle's door pulsed with the frantic colors of a game or a video. I towed off my shoes and hung Daniel's jacket on the back of a chair. It altered the room just by existing there, a small draft stopper against a day that had tried to get in through the baseboards. At 3:12, the sound came like a bottle tapping a countertop. At 3:13, it came like a break. Rookie's head snapped up. I was halfway down the hall before the second crash. The kitchen threw light in a harsh square across the floor. Kyle stood in the middle of it with a liquor bottle in one hand and the other bleeding from a bright, furious crescent. The jar that had held the kid's childhood shells lay in a glittering field at his feet. The ridged scallop, the beach glass, the flat oyster with the hole they'd once worn on a string. Don't move, I said quietly. He flinched like I'd shouted. I didn't. This was, don't move. I stepped around the island, tugged the trash can close with my foot, and took the bottle from him. He let it go as if it weighed a different amount than it had in his hand. I wrapped his palm in a dish towel and pressed until the blood stopped being a performance and became a problem to solve. His breath came in hot, miserable flashes. "I'll pay for it," he said, eyes fixed on the mess, as if the promise could glue a childhood back together. "You'll clean it," I said, "and then you'll sleep." He swallowed so hard it made a sound. "I called 5 people," he said, voice scraping the bottom of his regret. Nobody answered. "Then at least you know," I said. I kept my voice level because the accidentals in a sentence matter when somebody's bandaged and drunk. "Broom is in the pantry. Use the dustpan for the big. Use the vacuum for what you can't see." He started to argue and found the place inside himself where the argument had been exhausted. He took the broom. Rookie lay down just outside the field of glass chin on Pa's eyes, tracking the path of each sweep as if supervision could make the floor safe again. I waited while Kyle worked. The rhythm of bristles and breath settled into a tempo that houses recognize when they try to be better. When the last sliver landed in the can, I vacuumed once more without commentary, the hit of the machine making its own tidy geometry over tile. "Hand," I said. He held it out. The cut was shallow. I taped it with a strip that would hold until morning and poured the liquor into the sink. He watched it go with a look that wasn't grief and wasn't anger, and therefore qualified as progress of a sort. "I don't know how to fix any of this," he said almost conversationally, like a man admitting he's lost in a town with 2 stoplights. "You'll start," I said. "That's enough for a night." His laugh came out like a cough. "You always say things so simple." "They're only simple until you do them," I said. He nodded once, a real nod, then shuffled past me down the hall, the light under his door flattening to nothing. A beat later, I put the broom away and stood with my hands on the counter again, the posture my body now took when it needed to borrow patience from wood. Rookie leaned against my calf as if he believed in load-bearing legs. I reached down and found the place behind his ear that made his eyes close halfway. The tide clunked something soft against the pilings outside. Wind threaded the house with the faint smell of the bay. The jacket on the chair kept its shape. The night kept its footing. Morning took the shape of a clean kitchen and a bandage that held. Kyle slept late. The house made space for it. I brewed coffee and rinsed the vacuum head, tiny glints of glass winking in the strainer like mistakes that had decided to behave. Rookie followed each step with the quiet intentness of a dog who has already chosen the day's assignment. Maya came down in a sweater the color of wet stone. "I'm opening at Juniper," she said, tying her hair at the back of her neck. "Veronica added me to the schedule board through close 3 days this week." The line steadied her voice. She kissed Rookie between the eyes and took a travel mug I hadn't offered but had set out. "A text from Daniel Field open to the public at the fairgrounds today. Cones and chaos. If Rookie needs to stretch his brain, bring him by." He included an address and nothing else, which made it an invitation rather than an instruction. The fairgrounds had traded livestock for pylons. A line of orange cones mapped a serpentine. Pallets and PVC made wobble bridges. A blue kiddie pool waited with a tarp draped over it to pretend it was river debris. Volunteers in SAR K9 jackets moved like people who trusted each other's feet. The air smelled like dust and hot brakes from the county trucks parked along the fence. Daniel stood by a pop-up tent, Atlas at his side, a black and tan outline of competence that made handlers straighten without knowing they'd done it. Daniel lifted a hand when he saw us, the exact hello you give a neighbor at the post office. "You made it." "Your message promised chaos," I said. "We brought our own leash." He looked at Rookie the way carpenters look at old wood, respect first, then curiosity. "Let's see what he thinks." We started with easy. A station-marked place used a low mat. Daniel tapped the mat with 2 fingers. I said Rookie place, and he stepped onto it like a gentleman onto a porch. Daniel nodded once. "Nice." He showed me how to release with a quiet free so the word worked even when the world didn't. The serpentine came next. We walked a loose S between cones, while a volunteer shook a tin can of bolts at our periphery and another clapped with cheerful malice. Rookie flicked an ear, then checked my knee, the soft glance we'd built in 100 ordinary kitchens. He stayed with me. We came out the far side together. "Calm and recall," Daniel said, his game. I downed him on a towel, stepped away, felt his eyes warm the space between us. "Rookie here." He launched in a manageable arc and settled in front like a well-placed sentence. I felt the grin arrive before I could edit it. Applause rose from the bleachers, 20 people and 2 kids whose excitement didn't know volume control. Ms. Alvarez waved from the front row, a tote bag at her feet, and the look of a woman who had found a better Saturday than the farmer's market. She came down the steps when Daniel reset a station and knelt without fuss. "May I ask him?" I said. She offered her hand low. Rookie sniffed, then tucked his head under her palm with a sigh that sounded like agreement. A little boy with a shark on his t-shirt drifted closer, book clutched to his chest, as if words needed oxygen. Miss Alvarez patted the bleacher. "Read to him," she said. "He likes plot." The boy sat and opened the book without asking where page 1 lived. Rookie leaned in so far, his whiskers brushed the paper. The child's voice was a careful thread. Around us metal clinked and handlers called commands, but the soft cadence of a beginner reader braided the noise into something else. Daniel watched with an expression that read equal parts logistics and pride. "He'll never enjoy teeter boards," he said quietly, "but he'll sit for a story until the end credits." "And count doors," I said. He tipped his head toward the tent. "Come see Atlas work a scent box." Atlas jogged into a short grid of wooden frames with tin cups set into them. Daniel gave him a sniff of a gauze pad and said a word like a secret. Atlas moved slow, methodical pausing at each cup. When he hit the right one, he froze and looked at Daniel with the kind of eloquence you wish people learned in school. "Good," Daniel said, and rewarded with economy. On our way back, Tasha from the nonprofit handed Maya a clipboard of volunteer sign-ins. Maya had arrived without my noticing hair, hastily retwisted, cheeks bright from air and a brisk walk. "We need hands at the shelter this week," Tasha said. "Intake laundry is a monster. No glamour, lots of dogs." "I can do Tuesday," Maya said, pen already making her name behave in the blank. "And Friday afternoon after my shift." By the time Rookie and I got home, the light had gone high and honest. Trey sat on my porch steps, elbows on his knees, looking like a man who believed in straight lines. He stood when I came up the walk. "Miss Hart." "Coffee," I said. He shook his head once. "I'm here for Kyle." Kyle opened the door at the sound of his name hair, a compromised t-shirt inside out. Trey didn't waste words. "I talked to my manager. We need somebody in the IT cage at the distribution center. It's not coding. It's keeping scanners alive and knowing which cable is which. Day shift for a week, swing the next. Room at my place if you don't blow it." Kyle tried swagger, then let it fall. "What's the rent?" $600 in your own food, Trey said. "First and last by month's end. If you borrow it, don't borrow it from your mother." Kyle looked at me, then away. "When?" "Now," Trey said, "or not at all." Something in the word "now" made up Kyle's mind faster than speeches ever had. He nodded once, the kind of nod that rearranges furniture. "Give me an hour." Trey sat back down like a man who knew better than to supervise packing. I left them to the porch and went inside. Maya's door was open. She stood on a chair trying to convince a curtain rod to like the wall. "I need your level," she said without apology. "It's in the toolbox," I said. I held the rod while she found the bracket. "Veronica, confirm your closest." "She did," Maya said, voice muffled by the corner. "And she put me on inventory with her next Thursday. That's the list with the keys." I handed her 2 screws. She drove them into the pine with small, decisive turns. The rod held. She stepped down and looked at it as if it might break only if she asked it to. There. After she left for work, I opened my laptop at the dining table and typed the community college URL from memory I didn't know I'd kept. The continuing ed page offered courses in pleasant fonts: pottery, beginner Spanish, small engine repair. Photography 101. Seeing light. Saturdays 2 to 4. I filled in the fields the way you fill in a hospital form for a patient who can't write yet first name, last address, that has finally decided to be a single household again. The payment page ticked. Confirmation arrived with a polite chime. I closed the laptop without touching my face, which is what nurses do when they want to feel something, but also want to keep their hands clean. On the porch, Trey and Kyle ferried boxes in a rhythm that belonged to people who had figured out the width of a doorway. Kyle's cut held. He carried a crate of tangled cords with something like reverence, as if he finally knew which cable was which. "Keys," Trey said when the last box landed in the hatch of his hatchback. "Don't be late." It was not a threat. It was time. Kyle hugged me in that awkward way men use when they think hugging is a dialect they never learned. "I'll text when we're there," he said, then added, "because some grammar requires objects." "Thanks." I watched the taillights until the curve hid them. The house caught the quiet without dropping it. Rookie brought me the leash, not as a demand, but as a suggestion, and I hung it back on its hook where it waited like punctuation. Toward late afternoon, the bay turned the color of a spoon bag. I took the old camera from its case, a patient thing with a rubber grip, polished by other hands. Rookie kept pace to the end of the street and down to the pier. I framed the rope on a cleat, the fat twist of it making a question that didn't need marks. A gull crossed the rectangle of sky in the viewfinder and wrote a sentence I didn't rush to finish. The shutter made its small, satisfying verdict. On the walk home, Miss Alvarez waved from her hydrangeas gloves streaked with good dirt. "That boy read 3 pages to Rookie," she called. "Didn't skip the hard words." "Rookie likes plot," I said. "He likes being there," she said, and went back to coaxing blossoms toward blue. Inside, I set the camera on the table and let my finger find the leather crease in Rookie's leash, the one he'd made as a pup when the world was something to test with teeth. The house held the weight we gave it and didn't complain. Rookie curled at my feet and sighed once deeply, as if he'd put something down he'd been carrying too long. By noon, the porch was a loading dock again, this time neat and deliberate. Maya labeled boxes in block letters that made sense to strangers. Kitchen books winter, then taped them shut with a final palm swipe like a signature. Jessica's hatchback idled at the curb trunk, open, a bright umbrella wedged against a cooler, as if summer had volunteered to help. "I've got the heavy things," I said, reaching for a box that pretended to be light. "You have the wise things," Maya said, sliding it away with a grin. "Wise people don't lift ceramic." Miss Alvarez crossed the lawn carrying a foil-covered plate, as if it were a flag. "Chicken enchiladas," she announced. "Moving fuel." She kissed the air next to Maya's cheek and pressed the plate into her hands. "Return the dish when you remember who I am again." Rookie supervised tale describing a slow metronome. He rode shotgun for the short drive to Jessica's 3 turns and a small hill and greeted the new stairwell like an old story he wanted to hear twice. The apartment smelled like fresh paint and someone else's coffee. Light fell in clean rectangles on the floorboards. We set the boxes along the wall. Maya opened a window and the room got bigger. "This is good," she said. Not to me, not to herself, just to the air that would learn her voice. She knelt and buried her face in Rookie's scruff. "You can visit," she told him. "Don't learn my neighbor's door." Back at the house, Kyle's text arrived with the peculiar punctuation of a man pretending not to be proud. A photo of a lanyard badge, his name slightly crooked under the company logo. A second photo of a gray metal cage full of scanners and chargers and cables that looked like domesticated snakes. "Not coding, not dead either," the message said. "Back at 9. Don't wait up." I sent back a thumbs up made of words. Late afternoon thinned the light to something drinkable. Rookie nosed the leash, not pushy, just hopeful. We cut down to the dog park by the marina where the grass held on through salt and feet. Atlas was already there, black and tan against the fence line, precise even at play. Daniel leaned on a post with the posture of a man who'd found a moment that didn't need improving. "Look who found us," he said, as Rookie bounded toward Atlas with the polite joy of an old friend. They circled, exchanged a ritual of shoulder bumps, then decided to race the length of the field with the useless urgency only dogs and children get away with. The two of them reached the far end, tagged the chain link like base, and loped back, tongues pendulum happy. Daniel handed me a paper cup that steamed. "Stolen from the bait shop. They like their coffee mean." "I like mine honest," I said, and it was both. We watched the dogs patrol the shade, then stopped to greet a girl with a paperback tucked in the crook of her arm. She slid down the bench and read a paragraph aloud without being asked. Atlas lay sphinx still and considered her careful commas. Rookie inched closer until his nose brushed the corner of the page. The girl turned a little to give him more margin. "Tasha called," Daniel said after a minute, not hurrying the sentence. "Reading hour at the shelter is light today. Ms. Alvarez is covering. We could swing through with the dogs and keep a chair warm." We went because the map was simple across the lot left at the cannery road, 3 songs on the radio. The shelter hummed the way good kitchens do, hands where they needed to be, voices keeping the pitch low. A signboard out front read, "Quiet Stories, 3 to 4," in letters someone with round handwriting had colored in. Ms. Alvarez sat at the head of a semicircle of folding chairs, like a benevolent principal. A boy in a soccer jersey read about a dragon who couldn't blow fire, mouth shaping the words, as if they were the exact gum he was allowed to chew. Rookie lay down with the gravity of a sandbag and let his chin find my shoe. Atlas parked at Daniel's boot with the seriousness of a job he respected. Between chapters, Tasha handed me a stack of towels that smelled like bleach and sun. "If your hands are empty," she said, "the washer will fix that." I fed the machine and watched the dogs breathe. A girl with a bandage on her cheek whispered to Maya. When had she slipped in hair retwisted, name tag crooked, and offered to trade chairs so she could be closer to the dogs in case the dragon got too loud? When the hour closed, we walked out into a sky, softly deciding which blue to keep. Daniel loaded a giant bag of kibble into the back of his truck with a lift that assumed he would do this again. Maybe not today, maybe not here, but in some lot with some need. "Hungry?" he asked. Always, I said and meant the kind that food helps and the kind it doesn't need to. We ate fish tacos at a picnic table near the fuel dock, paper baskets rustling, napkins threatening to leave with the wind. Atlas parked under Daniel's knee like a stool. Rookie lay where my foot could find him without looking. Boats came in with the sober relief of people who believe dock lines are proof they made a correct series of decisions. Past the pilings, the bay held its pewter and its indifference. When the food was gone, Daniel wiped his hands and said nothing of significance. It felt like more than enough. He walked me back to my street, our elbows almost touching where the sidewalk narrowed. At my gate, he paused, not for effect, just because gates ask you to. He leaned down brief shore and kissed me in a way that respected the hour. It fit. Inside, the house had recalibrated. The quiet wasn't empty, it was precise. I put the welcome email for Photography 101, seeing light on the fridge with a magnet the shape of a crab. The subject line promised a classroom in Building C and a list of what not to worry about. I set the camera on the table, checked the battery with the same practicality I'd once reserved for IV pumps, and stepped back outside with Rookie keeping my pace. Down at the pier, the evening had decided to linger. A gull rode the air like a shrug, ropes creaked. The bell in the bay found its slow patience again. I fitted the camera to my palm until it became less a device and more a permission. Rookie settled against my shin, the weight of his head pinning me to the exact square of boards where the light liked us. I framed the fat twist of a mooring line and the scar it had pressed into the wood over time. The rectangle in the viewfinder sifted reflections cloud-hole the quicksilver arc of a fish. I kept my breath steady and pressed the shutter. The mirror snapped and came home. Somewhere behind me, a car door closed. Somewhere to the left, 2 laughter lines crossed and faded. The bay said what it always says when nobody demands a speech. Rookie's tail ticked once against my ankle. I lowered the camera and scratched the place behind his ear without looking. The leash brushed my wrist leather warm from my hand. The world held still long enough to be seen and then went on, which felt like the trick worth learning. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story. I'll see you next time as we continue exploring more journeys and lessons together.